This is Jocko Podcast number 79 with Echo Charles and me, Jocko Willink. Good evening, Echo.
Good evening.
And it has been a little while since we were able to hammer out some Q&A questions from the interwebs. And so here we are, number 79. Let's answer some questions from the interwebs. What do you got?
Cool.
Go.
First question, Jocko.
Oh, wait, should we spend a bunch of time with a bunch of fluff and talking about nonsense, or should we get to the questions?
Well, I say we get to the questions.
What about 27 minutes worth of advertisements? Let's get to the questions. Rock and roll.
I am a vascular surgeon training residents. How do you apply decentralized command when your team changes every 1 to 3 months?
Yeah, solid question. And with something like that, what we need to do is we need to get a standard operating procedure in place with clear documentation, some kind of a qualification and approval process, and then a monitoring system in place, right? So the reason I can the reason that's pretty easy transition for me to make mentally is because we would have to do this kind of thing sometimes in the SEAL teams. When you get, for instance, you're overseas on deployment, in a war zone, and you get some guys that show up to work halfway through the deployment or 2 months into deployment or 3 weeks before deployment ends. You get some guys that show up. They're SEALs, right? So they understand the fundamental concepts, but you haven't worked with them specifically before. They haven't worked with the platoon before. They don't know the area of operations that you're in specifically. They don't know what kind of mission specifically you're conducting and where the intel is coming from. Basically, they don't know anything other than the fundamental knowledge of being a SEAL. But as far as that particular job goes, they don't know too much. So what you have to do is you have to run them through a bunch of familiarization stuff very quickly about the gun trucks and how your Humvees are set up. You got to make sure they can get on a 50 cal and a Mark 48 and a Mark 19 and understand our crew-served weapons and how we operate them, because our crew-served weapons, by the way, a lot of times most of the time operate our crew-served weapons alone. So they got to make sure they can do this. Humvees, right? A lot of the older guys in the SEAL teams before the war started, they wouldn't know how to operate a Humvee. So you had to make sure they knew how to do that. They had to understand the mission, why we were doing the mission, what was important about it, what was the commander's intent. They had to know the rules of engagement. Because the military will take a guy that lands in country and they'll give him like a 30-minute brief to welcome to in country, and 30 seconds of it'll be a rules of engagement brief, and they won't really understand it. So you got to make sure they understand that. You got to. When's the last time they did medical training? When's the last time they did that? Has it been like 12 years since they put on a tourniquet? Okay, not good. We got to get them familiarized on that. How they're going to stop the bleeding, the different IED threats that are out there, because the IED threats change all the time. What kind of trigger mechanisms are being used and what kind of identifying marks are for IED. So there's all this stuff. The list goes on. And so you have to develop some kind of a standard operating procedure. Hey, when a guy shows up, this is what we need to do with them. Boom, they need to go through this. This little checklist you put together. And then if the person's a leader, maybe you got to go and do a couple left seat, right seat rides with them. So does that make, do other people use that terminology, left seat, right seat?
Not that I know.
Okay, so if I was the platoon commander and you were coming in to take over for me, we would plan a mission together and I would be in charge of the mission.
Yeah.
So I'd be in the driver's seat.
Oh, like a pilot, co-pilot.
Yeah, and
switch.
you'd be in the next seat. You'd be you'd be watching, and you'd be in the passenger seat, and I would be running everything. And then maybe we do that a couple times, and you're just watching me. And then we switch seats. You get in the driver's seats, but I'm still there watching and telling you to move a little left and move a little right. And then eventually you got it, and then I'm going to leave, go home.
Yeah.
So maybe if the person's a leader, you got to do 2 or 3 or 4 ops or whatever to get them a good turnover. So now in all these situations, or if it's not a full-on turnover, because that you're going to walk away from, but if it's just you've got some other group, small entity or people that are coming in, you're not going to be able to give them that full 100% decentralized command, right? You're still going to have to keep a little bit more watch on them, because you're not going to build up the full level of trust in 1 to 3 months. That's just not possible. So there will be a little bit of limitations, but you can definitely move pretty far down the path. And one other thing that's going to help, like I said, document, and that's really smart to put together a document with very clear roles and responsibilities and expectation, and then not just give them the document and say, hey, read this later. No. You sit down and go over every single thing with them. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to condense this timeline of building trust into the shortest possible time. And one of the ways you do that is by condensing everything into a simple, clear, concise format, written format, go through, talk it with them so they understand it and can do it very clearly. Like when I was in Task Unit Bruiser, I didn't lay anything like that out for the platoon commanders, for Leif and the Delta platoon commander. I didn't say, here's the roles and I did that over a long period of time, over a year workup. Now within a few months, they kind of knew what the deal was. But if that would have been my normal job and I would have been getting a new platoon commanders every 3 months, every time they came in, I'll be like, all right, you're the new platoon commanders. This is what a platoon commander does. This is the roles and responsibilities. This is the expectations that I have for you. This is when you call me. This is when you make a decision on your own. Lay all that stuff perfectly clear. And that way I could more quickly develop a sense of decentralized command. Now, again, it's not going to be full decentralized command. You're not going to be able to just let somebody run with it. They've only been with you for 3 months, and I don't know what the timeline is for a vascular surgeon to get total trust in their subordinate vascular surgeons or their subordinate team members. But I'm sure it takes longer than 1 to 3 months. So how much can you condense the timeline? What can you do to condense it? Once you get it condensed as much as you can, you're still going to have to do a little bit more monitoring than you would normally do. But it is still going to be beneficial. It's going to be beneficial for them, and it will be beneficial for you to operate as much as you can in the decentralized methodology.
So when you say condense the timeline, that's for the procedure?
No, it's condense the timeline to build trust, actually.
Okay.
So decentralized command is about trust, right?
Yeah.
If I trust you and you trust me, it goes up and down. If I'm in charge and I trust you, that means you're going to go out and you know what to do.
Yeah.
And when you're out there, you trust that I am going to cover for you and I'm going to trust the decisions that you make. Right. So decentralized command is about trust. In order to have trust, we have to have understanding. And in order to understand things, we have to work together. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to condense the timeline that it takes us to build trust. And how do I do that? I just am very direct and lay things out in a very simple, clear, concise format so that you can understand it.
Gotcha.
Very quickly. That's my goal.
Makes sense. Next question.